Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're demystifying the executive branch of government to figure out who really holds the power. Now, I know political structures can sometimes feel like a total maze of endless jargon and bureaucratic speak, right? But don't worry, we're focusing on the key words and keeping the terminology incredibly simple today. Let's just dive right in.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll meet the executive branch, then compare parliamentary versus presidential systems. After that, we'll tackle the big question, president or prime minister. Then we'll look at the permanent machinery and finally wrap up with job reservations and policy.
All right, Section 1. Meet the executive branch, the implementers.
The setup here is actually pretty straightforward. Basically, you can think of the government in two main parts, the legislature and the executive. While the legislature creates and passes the laws, the executive is the government machinery that actually implements them. It's the action arm of the state. It takes the words right off a piece of paper and makes them a reality on the ground.
Now, how do they actually implement these laws? Well, through highly specialized institutions. For example, if you need to collect GST, you use the CBIC. Tracking down money laundering, you deploy the Enforcement Directorate, or ED. And to combat terrorism, you rely on the NIA. This setup ensures that the absolute mammoth job of running a country is broken down into much more manageable, targeted actions.
But, as you can probably guess, this vast machinery faces some pretty serious challenges. The most famous one? Red tapeism. And get this, the term literally comes from the physical red threads that used to tie up pending government files. When a project gets caught in this red tape, it's delayed by just endless clearances and compliances. It's that slow, super tedious process you've probably experienced firsthand when trying to get a passport renewed or a permit approved. And honestly, it's one of the biggest reasons why a country's ease of doing business ranking can take a massive hit.
Moving on to Section 2, Parliamentary versus Presidential Systems. Okay, this comparison is absolutely crucial for understanding global politics. In a presidential system, think the United States, one person basically holds all the cards. The president is both the ceremonial head of state and the functioning head of government. That gives them immense unilateral influence. But in a parliamentary system like India's, those roles are strictly split. You have a president acting as the head of state, while a prime minister serves as the actual head of government.
So you might be wondering, why split the power at all? Well, the framers of the Indian system made a very deliberate choice here. Coming straight from an era of immensely popular freedom fighters, they really wanted to prevent a personality cult from forming. By going with a parliamentary system, they ensured that the executive is constantly accountable to the legislature. It's a built-in guarantee that a leader doesn't just hold absolute power indefinitely. They can and will lose that power if they lose their majority support.
Which brings us to Section 3, President or Prime Minister. Seriously, between these two roles, who's actually pulling the strings? Well, while the president is the ceremonial head, mostly just acting on the advice of others, the prime minister is the absolute linchpin of the government. And working right alongside the PM is the cabinet, which is basically a super decision-making body of top ministers. Together, the PM and the cabinet are the supreme policymakers. They are the real driving force of the entire country.
The president's more ceremonial role is actually perfectly reflected in how they get the job in the first place. Unlike the prime minister's party, which is voted in directly by the citizens, the president is chosen through indirect elections. It's this rather complex proportional representation system where MPs and MLAs cast the votes. Because they aren't directly elected by the everyday public, their mandate is, by design, much more nominal.
But wait, what happens to this whole power dynamic when elections result in a fractured mandate? Like, what goes down when the political landscape gets muddy and absolutely no single party gets a clear win? This is where things get really interesting. When there's no clear majority and governments are formed by these fragile, patched-together coalitions, the president's discretionary powers suddenly skyrocket. Take the chaotic coalition era from 1991 to 1999, for example. During times like that, the president actually gets to choose who to invite to try and form a government. Famously, President K.R. Narayanan used this exact power to demand a written letter of support. He basically asked potential prime ministers to prove in writing that they actually had the backing of 272 MPs. Oh, and presidents can also use what's called a pocket veto to just indefinitely delay legislation by simply taking zero action on a bill. Talk about a hidden superpower.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's team, the Council of Ministers, is tightly regulated. First off, they cannot exceed 15% of the total Lok Sabha members. That was a rule introduced just to keep cabinet sizes manageable. Furthermore, their political survival relies entirely on maintaining the support of at least 272 MPs. And this is crucial. They are bound by collective responsibility, meaning, sure, you can argue all you want behind closed doors, but once a cabinet decision is made, you absolutely must support it publicly. If a minister fundamentally disagrees, well, their only real option is to resign.
All right, Section 4, the permanent machinery, also known as the bureaucracy. There is just a massive contrast between the two types of executives running the country. On one side, you have the political executive. These are the ministers elected by the public. They rely on popularity, they have no fixed tenure, and honestly, they often lack specialized administrative expertise. But on the other side, you have the permanent executive, the bureaucrats. These folks are recruited through grueling, highly competitive exams like the UPSC. They have a fixed tenure until retirement, and they are highly trained experts who actually know how to navigate the complex files and, implement the policies. But life as a civil servant, it's incredibly complex. They act as this vital bridge connecting political promises directly to the public's reality. I mean, we all saw this firsthand when bureaucrats managed the absolute immense logistics of COVID-19 relief, making sure critical supplies actually reached our communities. Yet, despite being the literal backbone of welfare delivery, they face some really harsh realities. They have to deal with constant political interference, and they're frequently subjected to abrupt transfers or even unfair suspensions if they happen to clash with the political executive. Let's move into our final segment, Section 5, Job Reservations and Policy.
Now, the reservation policy for these government jobs has seen a decades-long evolution. Back in 1979, the Mandel Commission was appointed to figure out the criteria for backward classes. Fast forward a bit, and this eventually led to the introduction in the 1990s of a 27% job reservation specifically for socially and educationally backward classes, or SEBCs. Obviously, this was heavily debated, but in 1992, the Supreme Court officially upheld the order in the landmark Indira Swani case, and that cemented this policy right into the permanent machinery's recruitment process.
However, while the Supreme Court upheld those reservations, they mandated one highly important exception. It's known as the creamy layer. Basically, this refers to affluent individuals within those backward classes whose family income exceeds 8 lakhs annually. By falling into this so-called creamy layer, these individuals are treated equally to the general category, meaning they become ineligible for the reservation benefits. The whole idea here is just ensuring the support actually reaches those within the community who need it the absolute most. And that brings us to a final, somewhat provocative thought for you to chew on. Think about it. If the politicians make the promises, but it's the permanent bureaucracy that actually controls the files and does all the implementing, who truly runs the country? Is it the face smiling on the election poster or the unseen expert cutting through the red tape? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helped clear up the incredibly complex world of the executive branch.